Guys, welcome to the First Responder Playbook. It is my pleasure to welcome Rodney Carpentier to an episode tonight with us. Rodney is a former law enforcement officer, mystery writer, um, and a man of many talents. Rodney, give yourself a good, proper introduction.
All right, so I'll just clarify one thing. I'm actually still active law enforcement.
Okay.
About to hit 17 years. So I have in New York State we retire at 20. So I have about 3 years left. I have been in law enforcement for counting my corrections time. I've been in just about 20 years, and I've gone from correction officer to sheriff's office where I worked patrol for a number of years. Became an investigator, got involved in computer forensics and financial crimes before making sergeant, which I was the patrol sergeant for just shy of 10 years. I worked all three shifts, moved into an administrative role about a year ago. And recently, within the last 2 weeks, I got promoted to lieutenant, still doing the administrative stuff, but just kind of at that next level up. In the meantime, back in 2022, I was working one of those midnight shifts as a sergeant, and it was kind of slow. And I came up with an idea to become I came up with an idea for a book, and I ended up writing it. And about 2.5 years later, I released it.
That's awesome. Was law enforcement always the goal?
No, I was I was an English major in college studying literature. There was this kind of far fetched dream of becoming a lawyer, but the more lawyery stuff I took, pre-law type things, I'm like, this isn't it. So I didn't really kind of know what I was doing. I graduated at 22, or yeah, I graduated at 22. I got married, and we moved to LA. And looking for work in Los Angeles in 2004, there wasn't a lot. I was working for like 10 or 11 bucks an hour. I had student loans I was trying to pay off, and they had a big banner over one of the streets over Hollywood Boulevard. Actually, said join the LAPD. So I um, said, hey, why not? So I started going through their process, and that kind of inspired me to look more into the profession. Read a fabulous nonfiction book by a New York City police officer called Blue Blood by Edward Conlon. And that kind of, romanticized it a little bit, but also was very gritty and very real about what the job entailed. I became more and more interested. We kind of decided to leave California when dropped out of the LAPD process. When I got back to New York in 05, I started taking civil service tests. And a year or so later, that's when I got picked up by state corrections, and it's all kind of, been going since then. So wasn't the initial goal, but it was still an early on thing.
That's awesome. I can relate to that a little bit because my degree is not in criminal. My original bachelor's degree is not in criminal justice, and I never wanted to really be in law enforcement either. And then it just kind of hit me, and here I am. Gosh, 14, 15 years later, counting my dispatch time. So it's one of those things that once it finally hits you, you're like, man, I'm addicted. I'm staying.
Yeah, it's weird. I hate to say I fell into it, but I kind of did. It wasn't. I work with a lot of young kids now, especially in my role as a sergeant, a lieutenant, and um, some people dreamed about this their entire life, and they prepped, and they came from those families. We recently hired a young man. He's like 22 years old, and I'm like, oh, I remember that. But he's a legacy. His I think his uncle's a police chief in one of the cities in the county. His dad was a police officer. His brother works for one of the towns, and so we picked him up at the sheriff's office. So he's kind of his cousin actually works for us. Also, he's a sergeant. I worked with his cousin for years, so it's interesting to see kind of the legacies, but then also the people that just kind of fell into it. Like our chief deputy right now, she started in the NYPD, but prior to that, a she was going to college in New York City, and actually has a Master of Fine Arts in dance. but she kind of, she kind of had some more conservative leanings than a lot of her classmates. And she's like, I don't want to be, in this. So she, looking for a job. She wound up in the NYPD, did that for a couple years. She took the test with us. She actually started at the SO about a year after I did. And I worked with her. She's very smart. She's tenacious, and she's worked her all the way up to chief. And so again, it's, she kind of fell into the job, and here she is running, a department of, 100, 110 people.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
you gotta love stories like that. Um, can you talk about your time in state corrections? I mean,
sure.
usually a lot of times those are the worst of the worst, and corrections doesn't get the spotlight it deserves, but it really teaches you how to interact with people.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those things when I was interviewing originally with the sheriff's office. A lot of the people I was interviewing with that had kind of were at the investigator / sergeant level at the time had started at the county jail, so they kind of had that corrections background. And so when I spoke about that, it was definitely one of those things that kind of get me a foot in. Like, I wasn't a criminal justice guy, but yeah, interacting with people and having to use the skill, your interpersonal skills, because when you're a CO, you don't have necessarily all those tools on your belt that you do as a police officer. It's probably changed a little bit now, but for the most part, no. It's just, you're in a housing unit. Um, Saturday morning, you got to get everybody up and cleaning, and before the sergeant comes through and yells at you, the only thing you have is sheer will and come on, guys, but having that presence and building that respect and that rapport, yeah, you rely a lot more on your mouth than you do your hands or your tools. So, but my experience state corrections, I started at a facility called Sullivan Correctional Facility. It was a max. We had actually I had a couple of well-known New York State inmates. First was Arthur Shawcross. He was a serial killer operating in the Rochester area back in the 80s. He he finished out his sentence there. He passed away while incarcerated just after I got on. And another one we had there was David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer,
Yep.
was one of our inmates too. Met him a bunch of times because being the new Jack, while I was there, I got stuck. My first 2-week assignment was in visit frisk. So every day I had to bring everybody in, and at the end of the day, I got to see everybody out.
Yep.
So you learn a lot about life that way too. But Berkowitz was in. I think, like I said, I had that for 2 weeks maybe. And he came in probably a good 6 or 7 of the 10 days I was in that rotation. So, and we had a couple other guys there. There was a mafia killer by the name of Mean Joe Sullivan was there. So you meet some interesting people in the correctional world. And also while I was there, there was a singer songwriter around the same time. He was very popular. He was popular in the uh, uh, American Idol scene. His name was Gavin DeGraw. And
Yeah.
he had a song that goes, "Wanna Be" or "I Don't Want to Be," and the first line of the song is, "I don't want to be a prison, I don't want to be a prison guard, or I'm nothing but a prison guard's son." His family were all prison guards at Sullivan Correctional Facility. There were a large contingent, so he was from New York, and his family worked there. But my stint at Sullivan was actually only about 2 or 3 weeks long. There was another facility that was actually closer to where I was living at the time. So I moved to a facility called Mid Orange, which was a medium A, whereas we had 2 rows of razor wire fence, but it was actually an outside facility. We had cottages, we had the Puppies Behind Bars program, we had it was, we called it Camp Cupcake. We called, it was not a max prison. There were a lot of older inmates there. There were we had a lot of guys that were in for vehicular manslaughter, based on like a DWI kind of situation. So you didn't have like hardcore um, people there. I had I was local, so I kind of, the first year I was there, I kind of monopolized the fact that I could come in at different times. I was flexible, so I would get I got chances to go on trips because in New York State, one of the big things, because a lot of the employees of state corrections all live up in the northern and western part of the state, but a lot of our facilities are in the southern tier down towards New York City. So these guys have to commute, and a lot of them will do swaps. So they'll do 2s and 4s, 4s and 8s. I knew a guy who basically swapped and worked the entire winter so he could have the summer off because he worked at a racetrack. So they could do all these things. But I was so they were kind of set on their schedules and things like that. Whereas me being a local guy, the sergeant could call me up the day before and say, "Hey, you want to work 6-2 tomorrow?" Yeah, I got you, boss, no problem. So I was one of those Swiss Army knives for a little bit, multi
Yeah.
tools for them. Then I took a bid. I started getting serious about becoming a police officer. So I took a bid in our yard tower, which was a solo post. You basically didn't even enter the facility. Like I came in, I was one of the few guys that actually changed into my uniform at work. A lot of guys just drove in the uniform. So I would go in, I would change. I would walk upstairs. I'd check in with the sergeant, make sure he knew I was there. I'd go downstairs. I would see the armory guy. He'd hand me my 38 and my chemical weapons. I would see the outside roundsman. And he would drive me out to my post. I'd crawl up there, and I wouldn't see anybody until the afternoon guy came and got me.
Wow.
So unless the sergeant came out or there was some kind of random inspection, but typically didn't happen. So what I would do, I had a big old lunchbox because I would have to bring all my supplies because nobody was bringing me anything. And at the bottom of that, I'd hide all my study books for civil service tests. So I sat up there for about 6 months and I studied my butt off. And I wound up, so I took the county test. I ended up getting a 95 on that. I took the New York State Police test. I did not do so well on that. To this day, I don't know what happened, but fate. I got a 70 on that, but it was a different kind of test. The way that they, the questions that they had on that. So after I took those tests, I wanted to change of pace. So I bid a role as the disciplinary officer. So I worked directly for a lieutenant who was kind of a hard ass. And my job was to collect the disciplinaries from the chart sergeant every day. And I would bring them up, but I have to serve them, and then we would randomly do hearings. Lieutenant come in, with with an itch in her butt, and she'd be like, "All right, give me some people," and we'd call a bunch of people in, we'd do hearings, we'd have to, I was responsible for that, but working for her was very beneficial. She took care of me at times. We had a pretty good working relationship, and as the spring came into summer, I got canvassed and I started going through the background investigation and everything. So I told her what I was doing. I said, "Hey, listen, I'm not going to be here much longer." She's like, "That's okay." She goes, "When you're ready to go, let me know. Let the scheduling lieutenant know, but whatever you have to do." So I got a call for an interview on September 11th, actually,
Wow.
of 2008. The interview was maybe 10 minutes long. And Chief's like, "All right, so go get your medical done." So got my medical done, and I called him back. I said, "Hey, I'm all set." I said, "Should I be putting in my notice?" He goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay." So it's my credit. I went to work that weekend. I went in on Saturday. I filled out all my slips to take off the 2 weeks pretty much. I banged in sick on Sunday. I went on Monday. I did my job for about an hour and a half till a scheduling lieutenant came in and turned everything in. He goes, "So when do you want to leave?" I said, "About 10 minutes ago," and never looked back.
That's awesome. When you got hired at the sheriff's office, did you go directly into a patrol position?
Yes. Police academy first. We have a 6-month academy. Um, so that was basically September through February. Yeah. And then went straight to patrol. And I worked as a patrol deputy. I worked all 3 shifts. In New York, the sheriff is responsible for a ton. We do, because we run the jail, obviously, but we also do all the civil process and serve the process of the court. So I kind of fell into doing a lot of that stuff as opposed to the more proactive, kind of interdiction stuff. We had a bunch of guys that did that, but nobody else was doing the other stuff. So I kind of fell into that, or taking the walk-in complaints. So I started kind of doing more of that stuff. And in 2012, I got picked to move into investigations, and I kind of started doing, I got what I call the mystery box. The Our chief, who was an investigator at the time, she had started a case on patrol that was just what we call a bad check complaint. Somebody wrote a check, couldn't cash it, and it was connected to a couple of different things, and she actually parlayed that into what ended up being like a large mortgage fraud ring. And around the same time, we had a task force with the FBI that was doing narcotics work and stuff. So they actually were starting up a white collar unit. So they moved her over there. And when they did that, all her open cases kind of went into the mystery box. And when I got there, the sergeant says, he goes, you could have that. And I'm like, cool. So I had to kind of dig through there and figure out what I had, and kind of pick out what I was going to do with the different cases and stuff. And I had to get creative. So
What has been your favorite assignment so far throughout your career?
I really enjoyed being a sergeant, and a patrol sergeant. Midnight hours weren't great for me, but I learned a ton about being a supervisor, being a leader from that group of people, because it was an older group for the most part. I was probably the fourth or fifth youngest on that squad, so they had a lot of experience, but they were also kind of trying to lay low and just hang out.
Yep.
And then I had a couple of really active guys that every night they're pulling over 10 to 11 cars a night, trying to. One guy was a huge DWI guy, so I learned a lot from that, because again, like I said, I wasn't a big proactive patrol deputy, but now that I had to kind of deal with what they were doing, I needed to kind of step up my game to make sure that I was able to articulate what they were doing, which my
Yep.
investigative background helped, because I was able to, I would just kind of shove and be like, hey, what do you got? And they'd tell me, and we'd kind of talk through things to make sure we're all on the same page. And then the other guys, trying to get them motivated, we didn't even have lineups some nights. Some nights I would just be like, hey, get in your car. We're going down to, we had a unincorporated area that didn't have a local police department right outside of one of our cities. So I'm like, hey, let's go down there and pull some cars over for 2 hours, 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning, let's just do that, write a couple of tickets, show some activity. And then I said, then you guys can go relax, go check some parks and stuff, but let's go kind of hammer it for a little bit. I
Yep.
tried. It wasn't always successful, but I tried. But I really really enjoyed being a sergeant.
Yeah, that I've worked with some guys like that, and they're like, I actually had a really good sergeant. I loved him to death. Um, I always told him, he always told me he was off reading policy somewhere, and I knew where he was at. He was at the sports complex studying that policy. But I always knew that when I would stumble in, I liked being proactive at the time, and I'd stumble into something. I always knew he would be there to back me up when it mattered. And so I learned pretty quickly that in law enforcement it takes a mix of everybody, because
Uh,
if you have a just a group of straight proactive people, well, then the rest of the stuff's getting neglected and not getting done. And so it really truly does take a mix of all kinds of people to have a successful shift, department, everything.
totally agree with that. I went to a leadership class here, and I loved it because the guy basically used nothing but Band of Brothers references, which I loved. I was like, I know that. Um, and he actually had a relationship, I think, with Richard Winters and stuff. Like, he had interviewed him and talked to him at some point. So it was really, really cool. But he made a point. He said, because he had retired as a lieutenant, and he had a similar kind of situation to what I had. Was He was running a midnight shift, and he had a bunch of young guys that wanted to go be proactive. And he had a couple of older guys that just kind of wanted to get to retirement. And the boss came to him and said, hey, we're not getting enough parking tickets out on this shift. He's like, okay, no problem. So he went to the older guys and said, hey, you guys are going to go write parking tickets. And he's like, and they're like, Yeah, sure, no problem. Not no worries. So they came back to him, 3 months later, and we're like, okay, so we see that the parking tickets went up, but officers A, B, and C have all the parking tickets, and D, E, and F have all the arrests. He goes, yeah, what's the problem? You know, and so he kind of had to have that fight. So it definitely have to have a mix, and because all people are different, you got to find out what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like I had a female deputy that worked for me on midnights. She was like mom. She took care of everybody, and um, she wasn't going to go over pull over cars and write tickets and do all that other stuff. But she outside of work, she was a social worker. She had a social work background. She was at the time on our crisis negotiation team. So I knew when I had a difficult person to deal with, she was going to be able to go there and talk and be that communicator. I had a tactical guy who was kind of on his way out of being being on the TAC team, but he still had that background. And I knew if I had a situation we had to clear a building or something, I was going to lean on him. So
Cool.
just finding the right people for the right things.
It's awesome. I love it. Um, how did you decide that you wanted to write a book? Like, how did you end up going down that route? I know you said you're an English major.
Yes.
Has it always been kind of something you'd wanted to do?
Theoretically, yes, it's something I always wanted to do. I've always had an imagination. I've always had ideas for stories. I'd write things when I was a kid, but I didn't really have the background and the structure and stuff. And to me, probably stupidly, when I was in college, I studied the literature. I didn't really take a lot of creative writing classes. I ended up taking, I think, one or two creative writing classes, which I did well in both of them, and produced some interesting stuff. But I never studied how to write, but I wanted to be a writer. So in college, I came up with this idea, and I started running with it when I wasn't studying up in the yard tower. I was also working on this book, and I wanted it to be something, but I didn't have quite the motivation. It was kind of more of a side hobby, pass the time, and I figured basically there's always time for that. And the the difference was in 2022, my father passed away in April, just after his birthday, right before Easter. Um, it it was a shock when it happened, but it wasn't surprising. Like he had poor health for a number of years, so it was about a month later that I was working that midnight shift, and I came up with this idea, and I had a log line, and the log line was I'd been listening to a ton of true crime podcasts because again on midnights for a long time I listened to classic rock radio, and then I moved to sports talk radio, and after a while I moved over to podcasts,
That's how
and
I got into podcasting too. We got a lot of time to pass on overnights.
yep, and so I started listening to true crime podcasts. So I had a couple that I really really liked, and again, this idea popped in my head. And it was basically like a true crime. It was like a true crime podcast idea. It was, what if you had grown up your entire life knowing you were adopted, but at that time in your life when you wanted to find out what your who your real parents were and what your past was really like, you did one of those DNA tests and it came back, and it wasn't that your ancestors were serial killers. It was that your mother was the unknown victim of a cold case homicide. And what does that do? And so, like I said, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It was I won't use the Q word, but it was rather uneventful. Like
Right.
even the radio was nothing was chirping, and I this idea popped in my head, and I was on a double actually. I had worked the whole sea line, and I had gone into the overnight, and I was doing the head bobs, and
Yep.
this idea popped in my head, and I'm sitting at my desk. I was supposed to be going through reports, and I was like, I need to write this down. So I got a blank piece of paper out, and I just, it was like the old days when I'm like, oh, I got this idea. Let me put it down. So I started writing it out, started working on it, started creating some of these characters. And while I was doing it, that's when I kind of get the inspiration that as interesting as that log line was, it was going to be more interesting if I put it from the perspective of a police officer. because that's what I know. I know cops. I know how it would work, and again, a local guy, not a FBI agent, not a, high placed, super technical, super trained guy. I said, give me a rookie, give me a guy who's brand new to this, and put him in the middle of it somehow. So, and that's what I did. So I created my character Mike, and he's that legacy guy. His dad was the police chief. His dad passed away about 7 years before the beginning of where the book begins, and they didn't have a very good relationship. And now he's trying his hand at law enforcement because he doesn't know what to do. He's 24, completely lost him. And so I was like, that was very much me at the time. Like, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. And when I wound up starting to work in law enforcement, and he finds out that we have this whole logline background to the cold case. Well, he finds out that his dad was the first officer on scene. And it's been 40 years since this all happened, and now True Crime Podcaster is one of the major characters in the book, and so he introduces this idea, and so now Mike's got to figure out, well, how did I not know about this about my dad? Yeah, we didn't have a great relationship, but I figured I would have known this, and so he starts looking into it, and then he stumbles upon his own murder case.
Wow.
And he's the first officer on scene, and there's a lot of parallels, and where does he go from here? And that's where the novel, it kind of grew out of that.
I love that. And I was reading your bio. It's a series of 3 books.
It's going to be, the first book came out last October, second book's coming out the end of August, and the third book, I have about 1.5 scenes written so far. So, but I'm aiming for next spring. I'm learning the whole marketing end of things, and trying to time it just right so that I can capitalize on a couple of different things that are happening. Like, I'm releasing the second book right around, there's a big conference of mystery writers in New Orleans that I'm going to. So I'm releasing it just before that happens. It's the couple days after Labor Day. So I'm getting that out right around then, so I can bring those books with me to the thing. It's to the conference. There's a lot of readers that go to that, so hopefully I can kind of build up something there. And then in New York, we have in the fall, specifically spring and the fall, we have what are called street fairs, where vendors are just out on the street. I've done a couple of warm up ones back in June and a couple weeks ago. But in September, with the foliage and all this stuff, all these different communities have their stuff, and they have people from New York City and from all over the place that are coming to these areas. So I definitely want to have the second book out for that, and then the third book I want to get out for the springtime so that I can hit all those spring shows too. So
I love that. How long does the process take of writing one of your books?
all right, so the first one I started writing in 2022. And I thought I knew what I was doing, but again, didn't take a lot of creative writing classes. So I had to go find those books that were on a shelf somewhere. I dragged them out, and I'm learning, I'm reading, and I'm reading, and I'm reading. And I'm like, all right, I kind of get this. So I'm writing, and I'm doing some stuff. And then I went back to podcasts, and I found a ton of podcasts with professional book coaches and all these different people. And they described the whole process of what I needed to do. I was like, so I'm starting to learn the process, learning about how to write. And there was one specific podcast because I was having problems structuring the story. And a specific podcast did a multi-part episodes on a certain structure called Save the Cat. It's basically a storytelling method that are used a lot for movies, which spoke to me. And it basically, the host did comparisons between the writing of the Hunger Games and how this structure worked with the Hunger Games. I'm like, okay, I saw those movies, and how that works. So that really spoke to me. And so once I had that, I structured the book. So I lost a lot of time doing that, but I had the ideas. So I finished writing in the fall of, so I started writing in 22. I finished the first draft at the end of 2023. And all the podcasts and professionals that I had listened to had said, all right, you got to take a month off. You got to put it away for a month because you're too close to it. You need to put it away, set it down, and go back after a month. So I went back after a month and I started editing. And I'm like, oh crap, this is terrible. So I'm going through and fixing things, and you know, I really got hung up after a while on the first scene of the book. I'm like, I don't want it to start here, but it has to start here if you want it to all work out. And I'm hemming and hawing, going back and forth. So I finished the second draft, and I gave it a little bit of breathing room. Then I did a third draft, and then I'm like, okay, what am I doing here? So um, you kind of get to a path that deviates at this point. So you can go what's called the traditional route. And what you do is you send what are called query letters out to agents. You got to find an agent first. That's how this typically works. And it can take a long time to find an agent. And you basically send a letter and say, hey, I have this book, yada, yada, yada. And if they're interested, they'll say, all right, send me, 10 pages, 100 pages, send me whatever. And they'll read it and they'll say, okay, I think I can sell this. I'll sign you. And then you go through the whole process where they'll contact all their contacts in the publishing houses, and they'll try to sell that book. And, depending on your luck, your talent, the quality of your agent and everything, you can get into a bidding war, and you can get a lot of money for them to buy your book and to do everything. But a lot of that's out of your hands.
Right.
And sometimes with publishers, they may not like your title, so they'll change the title. They have their own book design, cover designer, so they'll design your cover. They might give you like, hey, what do you think of this? You like this, right? Okay, good, kind of thing. But again, I haven't worked with that, but this is kind of the stories I got. So I was like, I really don't want to do that. And at the same time, I have a partner of mine. I've worked with him. He's got 6 months less than me on the job. He started right after me. He's an established horror writer, and he's been doing it since probably the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. So he's got, almost a decade in this. And so I started, kind of, getting in his ear, because right around the time I finished, he got hurt. He got hurt on a job. So he was on light duty working a desk. I'm a patrol sergeant. My desk is right next to what we call it the COG, the communications area. So I just kind of, I pick his brain every once in a while. I'll ask him, and he goes, you can go traditional, but you're gonna have to wait. He goes, or you can do what he did and go indie publishing or self-publishing, and you can make a lot of your own decisions and stuff. So I was like, I think that's it. I think that's what I want to do. I want to have some control over this. I want to do this. So I went on a website called Readsy, and it's kind of a place where professionals can put up their advertise for themselves, and writers can they kind of play the middle person between them. So I found an editor. She lives in Ohio. No, not Ohio. Excuse me, Missouri. So I liked what she had. I liked some of the reviews. So, sent her the manuscript, and she was fabulous. She checked with me every week. She's like, okay, I'm this far in. I like what I'm reading so far. I like this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, cool. Some feedback. And it took her about 5 weeks to finish up. And so she sent me all the corrections. And then I got those corrections, like, holy shit. I have pictures from last summer when I was going through it. And I had for some reason I wanted to write it down. So I went through all her notes and I wrote things down. Like, you got to fix this and you got to do this. And after a while, I just started going through the document. In the meantime, I found another professional that does book covers, and worked with her. I told her what I wanted. So she's like, okay. She sent me 2 proofs. My wife and daughter and I were on vacation, and I got the email while we were walking around Salem, Massachusetts. And so I was like, oh, hey. So I showed them the first one, and they're like, eh. And then I showed them the second one, the one I liked, and they go, yeah, that's it. And it was love at first sight. Like, I had zero corrections with it. She nailed it. So then part of the editing contract that I had, she also did like a 90-minute Zoom call with me where I got to ask her anything. So I asked her about that scene that I wanted to move. She's like, no, it works. Leave it alone. I'm like, okay, cool. And, she just kind of really talked it up and gave me so much positive stuff. I was like, this is great. Okay, cool. So I finished all the edits. Then I found a proofreader, and this guy was awesome. Like he was so like he was like a type A personality that just was like, I'm here, I'm doing this. He took it on like a personal challenge that he was going to do this, and he worked so quickly. Like he's like, oh, it's going to take me 3 weeks. He was done in like 9 days, and he didn't, and his rates were really good too. I just got done working with him on the second book, and basically he was completely done before the first payment even got to him, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Um, so I had a finished manuscript, I had a cover, I had everything, and I'm like, all right, now I have to self-publish this. I still don't have the confidence. So last year I went to a yearly conference called Killer Nashville. Kind of splurged. My wife and daughter took a girls trip and went to India. So I couldn't go. I couldn't take that much time off of work with that stuff I had going on. So they went on a girls trip, so they were away. So I'm like, I'm going to go to this conference. So I went there and I met so many great writers and editors and people. And after doing that and talking to people, they had breakout sessions all over the place. And I did a lot of the business oriented stuff of, how do you act like a professional writer? How do you do the taxes end of things? So I did all the business stuff, and I was like, all right, I'm ready. So at that conference, I decided I was going to release the book on October 29th. I just made the decision. I said, send it. Because if I don't, I just gotta do it. If I don't do it now, it's not going to happen. So, and it's been kind of a roller coaster ride ever since.
I love that. Where can I get the book at?
So you can get it at my website. If you'll bear with me a second. This is the book. It's called Our Lady of the Overlook. It is available on my website directly from me, where you can also pre-order the second book. And that is rlcarpentierwriter.com. You can get it there. I'll personalize it. I'll sign it. I throw a bunch of really cool swag in there also. Or you can go to Amazon, where it's available there for paperback and ebook if you're an ebook person. I do not have an audiobook yet, which is sad because I'm a huge, podcasts, audiobooks. So it's kind of sad that I don't have an audiobook yet, but working on that. That's definitely in the works. Again, because I did things so quickly after I made that decision. I learned again. I had to just send it and learn
Yep.
learn what I did wrong. I knew I was going to do a trilogy, so first book was kind of haphazardly released. This one's a little bit better, and I'm hoping by the third one I kind of have my everything kind of smoothed out a little bit more. So
That's awesome. So I got to touch on,
yep.
because you brought it up earlier. Who's your sports teams?
My sports teams used to be, because I fell out of professional sports after COVID and everything in 2020 and 2021. I just stopped watching all that stuff. And at around the same time, also we moved, and when we did, we cut cable, so we only
Okay.
have streaming, so can't get all the sports. But I grew up a huge Yankees fan. I've been watching the Yankees since 1994. So I've always been a Yankees fan. I never really had a football team. I appreciated the way that the Patriots played. Obviously, they won a ton, but
Yep.
you know, um, but I was never like a huge Patriots fan. Like, I used to watch before I got into fantasy sports. I used to watch football basically on Thanksgiving and the Super Bowl. Like I never paid
Yep.
attention to it. So, but then my partner from patrol, older guy, he brought me in on fantasy baseball and fantasy football, and then I watched every week. I knew everything that was going on, but I
Yep.
never had,
I'm the same way.
but I never had a team in football. Grew up, where I grew up in Albany, New York, we had the Devils farm team for hockey. So I guess
Okay.
I was kind of a Devils fan. Like I knew all those guys, before they reached the NHL. Uh, and I was never a big basketball guy at
You
all.
know, uh,
So
it's funny. Growing up in Oklahoma, um, I've never really asked my brother this, but he was a huge Yankees fan. And 98, 99, I was 10 or 11. And that's when of course, the kid of the 90s, I grew up a King Griffey Jr. fan.
oh
Loved the
yeah,
Mariners.
absolutely.
But once I started really like developing like my own fandom, I think it's just I got to poke the bear with my brother a little bit. I grew up a huge Mets fan, and I love my losers.
Yeah.
And still to this day, we're actually talking about trying to go down to New York in September and going to a game in Yankee Stadium and a game at Citi Field because neither one of us has ever been.
Oh no.
And
Okay. Yeah. I've been to the new. Oh, I went to the old Yankee Stadium.
yep,
A bunch of times. Been to the new stadium. We used to go. A bunch of us from the job used to go down every opening day. Um, it was kind of a tradition. We rent a bus and we'd tailgate and get just disgustingly drunk.
yep.
It was terrible. And then I've been to City Field once. Friend of my wife's is a huge Mets fan, and for her birthday one year, they I think I don't know if it was a suite or just like a group of seats all together for her birthday, and we got invited along. So I was like, all right, I'll go.
Yep.
Uh,
It's just one of those things. Like my brother's older than me, so I think I always had to like the opposite teams.
yeah.
Growing up in Oklahoma, he's college football's king.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yep.
and he loves the University of Oklahoma, and I'm a big Oklahoma State fan. And so, like, there's not one team that we agree on that we both like.
It was
Um,
college football is funny. I did computer forensics for a while, and the Secret Service has a program where they have a school in Birmingham, well, right outside of Birmingham, Alabama.
yeah,
So,
I've actually had a partner of mine go through that
oh, okay,
program
yeah.
before.
So we went down there. So I went down there for a couple classes, but we did our month-long class, um, and we all got there. And we're from all over the country, obviously. And it was August, so you're just in that preseason mode,
Yep.
and we're from all over the place, and everybody's talking. Actually, we had there was a guy from Durant, Oklahoma, that was in my class. And a bunch of guys from Texas. Our class president was from Washington State, so we called him the Cougar. Um,
Yep.
but then me and my buddy from New Jersey are like, what do we have? Rutgers? like, we don't have a big college football team up by
Yep.
us. And ironically, the guys from Indiana were not Notre Dame fans, which I thought was ironic, but maybe
Who
they're
was their
too
team?
close to. I don't remember now. I don't know. Maybe like Ohio State or something,
Yeah.
or Indiana.
Right.
But they were not Notre Dame fans. My cousin who actually lives in Oklahoma, um, ginormous Notre Dame fan. Like he's got the Fighting Irish tattoo on his arm. Like he huge Notre Dame fan. So
It's funny. I think they're kind of like the Yankees or like the Lakers, and that they're kind of a national brand.
yeah.
And my roommate actually is a huge Notre Dame fan, and he lives in Oklahoma, so it's kind of funny how that works out.
Um, but we went to the University of Alabama while we were there. We got a hook up through their campus police, so we got to go in the locker room. We got to see Joe Namath's locker. We went out on the field. We didn't meet Nick Saban though. So we did, so that was cool. That was a really cool experience. So we did a lot of fun stuff. And then again, it was preseason for the NFL, so we actually drove to Atlanta, and that was the only NFL game I've ever been to. We saw I don't even know who the Falcons played, but we had decent seats.
Yeah.
But we did that, and then thing we did a couple times was the Birmingham Barons. are right
Yep.
there. So we went there. I got to see my Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan jersey that they had there.
Yep.
So, but yeah, it was a cool experience to experience other sports because mostly a bunch of guys, all locked together. What are we going to do?
Oh yeah.
Gonna talk sports.
So what I want to, as we start to kind of wrap up,
Yep.
I want to ask you one thing. If you could give advice to somebody who wants to get in law enforcement, what's your one piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say depending on where they're starting at, I honestly don't recommend the criminal justice background. Have a different skill, have a different point of view that you're coming from. Um, you know, I I've seen guys vary from, again, I was an English major, so so they tap that ability because I proofread everything for my sergeant at
Yep.
my first the first sergeant I had. I proofread everything for him, and now he's my boss again. He's the captain. He's the captain. I'm the lieutenant. I'm still proofreading things for him when he doesn't use AI. So
Right.
having that skill, of being able to write, it helped me as a supervisor. It helped me, help me articulate things as an investigator, where I had ADAs telling me, you know, hey, I read your complaints. Your complaints are fabulous. Like I don't have to worry about, I see your name come across and I know everything is going to be good. I'm like, well, thank you. Or, having that skill to teach younger deputies or deputies that didn't have quite the writing skills to help them learn how to articulate and how to use some of the proper grammar. But like our sheriff, he started out, he worked his way from corrections up to, he retired as a captain and then came back, got elected 3 years ago to sheriff. He was an electrician.
Well,
So having other skills that you bring to law enforcement, the academy and FTO and all those things will teach you how to be a cop. If you have the ability to bring something else there, I think that's helpful.
I agree wholeheartedly. My bachelor's degree is in geography, so
Yeah,
yep.
and I can't think of a way that helps, but I'm sure it does.
Hey,
In some
I can
strange way.
I got a lot of useless knowledge up here.
Yeah, my fellow lieutenant has a psychology degree. Like he goes,
Yep.
and he's like, the only thing I could have done was probably this, because it seems useless, but if you apply those things you learn, or and definitely don't either start in corrections and learn how to talk to people, or have a different job for a couple years, military, or um, something where you're interacting with people, something where you're working hard. Don't just bring something to the job. Don't
Yep.
think the job's going to bring you everything, because I've seen a lot of smart young folks who come to the job and don't have any other life experience, and it takes them a while to get into it.
Yep.
And they're like, "Oh, well, I took criminal justice and I know everything." And it's like, you don't know everything because you don't have any experiences. Bring something else to the job.
I agree wholeheartedly. Where can everybody get in contact with you at if they want to reach out?
All right. So again, website is www.rlcarpentierwriter.com. You can reach me at rlcarpentier the third, or the three I's, the Roman numeral. So rlcarpentier three I's at gmail.com. That's the direct way to get a hold of me on the email. I'm also on Facebook at, trying to remember what the latest moniker was, but I think it's RL Carpentier debut author, which I have to change because going in my second book. So now I have to say something else. I don't know what that'll be. And I think somewhere in there I'm on Instagram. I'm not really good with the social media stuff. Everybody says you have to be, but I'm not great at that. But
Yep.
the website's the major way. If you want to follow me on Facebook, I do post. Like I post the reveal of the second book when I got the proof copy the other day. So every once in a while. And through my website, you can get on my mailing list, which other than last week, I send out every week, and it's basically just kind of vomiting onto the screen a little bit, like, hey, I did this week. What did you do? you know. So I have a couple of regular things I do with that, but I keep people posted pretty much on what's going on, writing wise, life wise, and professional wise also.
I love it. Well, when the second book gets closer, you're welcome back, and we can talk
Appreciate
about the
that.
second book.
All righty.
All right, I appreciate it,
I appreciate
guys.
you, Brent.
Check him out. Check his book out, and give him some support. I'm all about helping other first responders out. Give him support on his book, and check his book out. Have a good night.
Good night.